Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing very well. Today we're going to look at the different types of flight models that various modules in DCS can have and the implications and what they mean. Now, I've been doing DCS for 5 years and I've read this document. This key document came out in 2014 from Wags, senior producer of Ego Dynamics. It can be treated as, gospel. However, I've personally never really understood it. So what we're going to do today is take this from Wags and try and explain it so that the average guy can understand it. And we've got here someone quite well placed to explain it. Grinelli from Grinelli Designs. Say hello.
Hello.
And you are the author of several free mods in DCS. Probably the best known is going to be the F-22 Raptor, but you've also done ones with external flight models coded as well. So we've got 4 types of flight model we can have. A standard flight model, sometimes known as a simple flight model, an external flight model in EFM, an advanced flight model, and a professional flight model. So these are the things that can control, if you like, how an aircraft moves through the air. And then systems models, standard systems modeling and advanced systems modeling. I should say as well, I have reached out for ED to try and get them to do this, but I've not had any luck, so that's why we'll do the best we can. Let's start with standard flight model. This has not changed and defines a more data-driven means of achieving flight dynamics in conjunction with some scripting. Standard or simple flight model was used in the Lock-On series, so before DCS, and is still used for AI aircraft in DCS. Can you explain standard flight model to us and which aircraft are going to be using it, please?
Standard flight model defines a more data-driven means of achieving flight dynamics. There's a nice image of a table that kind of outlines how that all kind of works. The table derives a Mach-driven organization. And depending on what Mach you're on, we will align ourselves to a different area of the table. The flight dynamics that are coded behind the scenes through ED take the information that we provide to it and say, at this Mach, you have this much lift, this much roll rate, this much drag, et cetera, et cetera. And then it attempts to compute all of that information into effectively what they call achieving flight dynamics, something that can simulate what it would be like to fly an aircraft in an atmosphere. They reference SFM being used in lock-on as well as being used for AI aircraft. All the AI aircraft include simple flight model tables. When you set a aircraft to be AI, whether it's easy or veteran difficulty, all the AI will still use the same flight model table when they're maneuvering against you. So there's a little bit of work that can be done once ED gets more ducks in a row with their weather and their damage models. And there's a lot that needs to be done, but this is something that probably won't see an update anytime in the immediate future. However, it's something that could probably stand to be updated eventually.
Let's talk about some anecdotal examples. So, if we are fighting against AI, I'm not a fan of fighting against AI in close range, as I'm sure any experienced close range fighter will know. Take an example. We do human versus AI campaign with warbirds. What that means is you get really dirty and close up to the hostiles and you can see them flying. And you'll follow, say, even the same warbird as you, and he'll suddenly go vertical, up into the vertical and do a big loop over. You try to follow him, you stall out immediately, and he just keeps on going. That's because we've got completely different physics engines. Mine is an advanced physics engine, as we'll look at later, in my aircraft, which following aerodynamics and stuff like that. His is just a little table like this. Now, I can guarantee I'll get lots of complaints saying, oh, that's stupid. There's no way that they should have these simple tables for the AI. You got no choice. You can't have 50 AI aircraft using the advanced flight models, which take obviously many more times calculation time to do it. You simply wouldn't be able to do it. It would be too complex for your CPU to do, and nothing would work. Hence, you're going to have these much simplified data tables for the AI. Otherwise, you could only have 1 or 2 AI guys, and that's your limit. So it's here for a reason. If you're going to start comparing it to X-Plane or something like that, that's just how it has to be, unfortunately. And there's only so accurate they can get it. In terms of which aircraft, obviously all the AI aircraft, for the reasons that we just said, are going to have it. Also, if you're talking about a lot of free mods, not all, but a lot of them will do, won't they, Grinelli? Like the F-22 Raptor, the Su-57. So they're very limited on how accurate they can be.
The A4 Skyhawk is probably the most notable. Yeah. They created a full fidelity module that is fully clickable, as accurate as they could make it to the information they had access to. under a simple flight model. We can segue into the external flight model by bringing up the MB339, which is also available through the virtual Freccia Tricolore.
Yeah.
They have gone through a lot more energy and effort to take that from an SFM to an EFM. Now, the EFM is what's currently in use by all third-party developers. The EFM will only use parts of the professional flight model. The EFM is far superior to the SFM because rigid body physics and what moments of inertia are applied, what aerodynamic source, you can change so many variables that you do not have access to change inside the simplified flight model. Hence, everyone who's ever flown a simple flight model knows when you get slow and you stall the aircraft, the API behind the scenes does not know how to handle that information, and the aircraft appears to freeze or lock up in the air. The EFM allows the simulation to calculate more data through the slower envelope, and it allows the plane to fall and stall and have that appearance that it's flying in an atmosphere as opposed to being driven around by some linear table.
If you're experienced in DCS or flight sims, you'll recognise the difference. If you take an A4 Skyhawk, which we're not slagging off, it's an excellent mod, as we know, and we always support it, and then you take the MB339, in normal flight regime, you don't really notice the difference, but until you start to stall or land or do something that brings you into the extraordinary flight envelope, you'll suddenly realise that the MB339 feels quote realistic, and it does, while the A4 at that point it breaks down and it doesn't work properly. You can't stall it properly, and that's where you can see the difference in the two flight models. My questions are representing the layman. First of all, who uses the EFM? Well, first of all, free mods who want to use it, like you, Edge 540 from Granelli Designs, Wright Brothers Flyer, Granelli Designs. Anything else?
The MB339, the Edge 540 are the two that stick out to me right now.
Roger. And in terms of official modules that you can pay money for, it's anything that's not created by ED. Is that correct?
Correct. The MiG-21 through Leatherneck, the F-14 through Heapler, the AV-8 Harrier from Razbam, the Gazelle from Polychop, all utilize the external flight model physics.
And that brings us on to the AFM and the PFM. Now, this is where my knowledge just really breaks down and it just becomes gobbledygook for me and probably a lot of other people. AFM, Advanced Model, and AFM Plus. And AFM, from WAG, says it uses multiple points of force application and calculation on the relevant flight surfaces. This simulates edge of envelope conditions well and avoids scripted behaviors as we see in the standard flight model. Exactly what we were talking about with the difference in the MB339 and the A4. This system also partially implements the aircraft's augmentation systems. Further evolution of the AFM is what we term the AFM Plus, and this uses the same calculation as the AFM but adds limited modelling of the hydraulic and fuel system. So I'm going to quickly tie up the PFM, Professional Flight Module. This is generations beyond AFM and is based upon a wider array of wind tunnel tests, CFD method for aerodynamic parameter calculations, a high level of aircraft construction details, forces calculations. For example, our landing gear model includes individual kinematics of retracting, extending, is used to calculate its movement, servo piston forces, etc. In some cases, we use real lengths, arms, etc. This also includes such items as realistic simulation of airflow along the airframe due to the propeller or helicopter rotor thrust, realistic simulation of flight control, CAS and autopilot systems, realistic simulation of hydraulics, fuel, electrical, engine and other systems influence flight characteristics, unprecedented access to test data packs. We see here which of the aircraft use which. So in terms of flight model, SU-25 and 25T are the only ones using the AFM Advanced Flight Model. Everything else that's from ED is the Professional Flight Model. Everything else that is not from ED, so all of the third-party guys are using the External Flight Model.
What's really important about the PFM is that they're talking about having realistic simulation of hydraulics and fuel and engine systems, realistic simulations of flight controls and autopilot systems, and CFD wind tunnel tests. There's no wind tunnel data that we were able to get access to for the Edge 540. If we went to ED and they said, Grinelli, we love the Edge 540. We love your virtual air racing series. We would love if you would make this airplane and sell it under our umbrella because we want more available in DCS. There's no way that I could go to them and deliver a professional flight model because we simply don't have the wind tunnel test that can allow us to generate the data. And it's literally thousands and thousands of lines of just information at every different state. Full aileron deflection, full flaps with gear drag, with elevator this, with a roll, with high alpha, with no alpha. It makes your brain hurt, genuinely. And it's the real heroes of this whole affair are the people that code these airplanes and helicopters, because there's no, without it, we wouldn't have what we have today. The modeling, there's nothing to sneeze at when it comes to the art department, but when you're talking about professional flight models, they enter this realm of like the brightest of brightest people that really wrap their hands and heads around advanced mathematics, advanced aerodynamics, stuff that I can't even speak to you on. I'd have to go to an expert that studies this in school and has devoted themselves to understanding this kind of information. It goes back on what we were talking about earlier, where the smaller development teams of 2 or 3 individuals, it takes years to achieve not only gathering all of this data, but then organizing it and then somehow transferring it into C++ without any documentation whatsoever on how you're supposed to do it. So it's a miracle that we have planes like the F-14 and how amazing they are. And even stuff with the F-18 that WAGS has been showing off, this new ground radar, is absolutely phenomenal. Everybody likes to get upset when bugs in the patches go wrong and things happen, and why don't you do this, and and it's real easy for us to criticize, but when you sit down behind the computer and you look at these thousands of lines of code, you kind of take a step back, appreciate what kind of energy and talent has to go into being able to provide this for us.
And in terms of the systems, we can wrap this up very easily, can't we, Grinelli? We've got SSM and ASM. SSM is what we would call a low-fidelity, non-clickable cockpit. Is that what you would agree?
The SSM is just essential cockpit systems using keyboard and joystick commands to interact with the cockpit. There's no clickability with a standard system modeling.
Roger, and the ASM is going to be essentially everything else that is clickable and systems model behind that. And needless to say, everything that is, I think we call it FC3, I suppose, so the lower fidelity, you've got SSM, and everything that's not low fidelity is the ASM. Now, the only surprises to me was that the FC3 guys, low fidelity modules, excluding the Frogfoots, are actually PFM, professional flight model. I just didn't realize that. So the flankers, the MiG-29, and stuff like that. So they are wind tunnel test data and stuff like that. But you were aware of that.
In short, in closing here, back in Flaming Cliffs, before they had the availability to create the APIs for these professional flight models and the advanced flight models, the aircraft were all SFM to a degree. If we were to have made the right flyer with SFM mindset, because the airplane would only travel 32 miles an hour, we would be limited to effectively one line of table data. If you're Mach 0 to Mach 0.1, and in that thought process, you would say to yourself, and I'm going to start making things up here a little bit, you would say to yourself, how much roll would it have? How much power would it have? How much drag should it have? Let me put one single integer or number in there, whether it has a decimal or not. Let me just put a value in a spot and then let DCS try to make it fly the way it should fly. The last thing to talk about, Cap, is people give Flaming Cliffs a bad rap because they're not clickable. That doesn't mean that the flight model data that you're actually flying is not on par with the F-18.
Well, apparently not.
So that's just from a user-based standpoint, the airshow community has used the F-15 and the F-18 both airplanes, when you're looking out the window flying off of another pilot, you're not really worried about all the other systems. You're just flying the airplane. And the experience, the feeling you get from that is effectively the same experience you would get with the Hornet, except you can't click the battery switch or turn up the brightness of your formation lights. There's nothing wrong with flaming cliffs.
So to summarise, that was our method of fleshing out and trying to understand the flight model types, and I think I've got a good grip on it now. So thanks for fleshing it out for us, Granelli. I hope that was useful, and see you later.